Welcome back to the Wolf of Property and Casualty. I'm your host, Derek Lasniak, with over 15 years of commercial broking experience, focused on the middle market, upper middle market, national account space. And today, I want to do an update. I've been tracking a lot of things going on with cyber liability, and for those who have listened for a long time, cyber liability has been a big part of my career and part of my growth in my career, and part of what catapulted me to some of the pinnacles of my career. Always had something going on with cyber liability. I started it at the firm I worked at, grew it into a practice group. They hired tremendous people that could dedicate all their time to it. But what I was left with was an expertise that was a foundation, and it propelled me to lead a $35 million group program for financial services clients. It also allowed me to have the knowledge and the intuition to start a special program for health insurance related companies on proprietary paper. And throughout that, I've gone through, I don't know, north of 200 claims. And I liken this to, as an insurance nerd, my employment practices moment. So if you know anything about employment practices insurance, nobody used to buy it, and then you wouldn't dream of not having it today. And cyber liability has followed really the same trend, starting in kind of the early 2010s, growing into still one of the fastest growing products today. So I'm calling this a cyber liability update, but it's going to be really kind of four sections. The first is some really interesting news that I've come across in the last couple weeks that I've jotted down that I want to talk about relative to the marketplace and cyber liability as a whole. The second is litigation is paramount to cyber liability these days. You are buying cyber liability insurance almost more so for litigation than the components that come with it for cleanup, things like ransomware payments, business interruption. So I want to talk about litigation. And then I want to talk about the coverage things that are on my mind and the things that I see subtly changing in the cyber liability market that you absolutely should be paying attention to, whether you're a buyer or a broker. And then lastly, a couple risk management items, because cyber liability, more so than maybe any other coverage, there is a direct relationship to how you spend your risk management dollars relative to your coverage and your overall preparation and ability to defend against cyber attacks. That being said, especially with some of the advancements that are going on with AI, it's hard. You don't have unlimited dollars for security. So, where to spend them where you get the most bang for your buck has always been the question when it comes to controls. And I know after talking to a lot of CISOs throughout my career that they are struggling with a budget that is never going to be big enough to form the type of security posture that they would like. So, let's start with some of the things in the news. So I want to tick through a couple items. The first one is, and I have appreciated, and by way of a little history, cyber liability marketplace in my mind has really three tracks. There is the Lloyd's of London marketplace, some of the inventors, some of the more custom products. One of the best places that you can utilize to quota share, meaning you can bring five carriers together on a single policy, sharing 20%, and then buy the policy limits up. It's also the place where you have the ability to customize your policy form. So you have all the London markets. Then you have blue chip carriers. These are names like Chubb, Travelers, CNA, that provide primarily domestic based cyber liability cover. And then over the last 5 or 6 years, you have a lot of the markets that we call MGAs, managing general agents. And these are on the verge of cyber becoming huge product lines. They said, I'm not going to leave cyber liability to a crusty old insurance company like Travelers to do it. I think cyber liability is a tech feature, and that requires tech and innovation and funding in Silicon Valley in order. So I'm going to get a lot of tech people together, and I'm going to build a better mousetrap for cyber liability. I'm going to take a lot of investments from private equity, and I'm going to borrow insurance capacity from reinsurance providers who have maybe thrown in the towel and said, I don't want to do this. It's too cutting edge. I can't keep track of it. I want to stick to my blue chip insurance. Names like Swiss Re, Munich Re, Allianz, for example. And a lot of these MGAs, because they had so much pressure to be profitable, they grew the top line. And then as ransomware came up, they folded because the losses outran the growth. And it turns out some of that stable underwriting wasn't necessarily as stable. However, there are some of these MGAs that stuck around. Some of them didn't. Corvus sold to Travelers is a good example. But one of the first and one of the ones that continues to truck on is Coalition. It was one of the first ones. They got to be going on a decade old. They've historically been backed by Arch Paper. They came out recently, and I'm going to call a little bit of bullshit here. They came out recently and said that first of all, they announced a huge deal. They are essentially taking over Allianz's book of business for cyber liability, which I didn't know they were that big. I think they were a pretty big excess player. I think they had a slip in London, but it's a big deal when another carrier says, I'm now throwing in the towel. Coalition, you can do it better. We're going to cede you our book. We're essentially going to let you start writing all of our cyber. And so that's a huge win for them. Now, did they get a little arrogant? They said something that really caught my attention. They said, well, we're running about a 40% less combined ratio than the market. And I find that a little hard to believe because the market is soft, as we know. Most carriers are reporting on average combined ratios, which again is the summation of claims and expenses per dollar of premium in the 60 to 70%. And keep in mind, at the height of ransomware, those numbers were 110%. Carriers were losing money. But it's been a really profitable last couple of years, despite some of the headwinds that they face in terms of litigation and ransomware. But to say I'm running 40% less than the marketplace average without any definitive proof because they're not publicly traded would suggest they're running about a 20, 30% combined ratio, which would be unheard of. And I find that very hard to believe. There's still too much claim activity out there. And frankly, for a company that has wanted to go IPO forever, why wouldn't they be running to the IPO doors in somewhat of a strong IPO market if they truly were running that high? It's not to say Coalition's not a great carrier. They have outlasted the battle of MGAs, in my opinion, and have always had one of the more innovative policy forms, and they've always been one of the more steady ones. We used to talk about MGAs as you're maybe renting an insurance policy that would be there for 1 year, but not the next. Coalition has always been the exception to that, and I think Allianz giving them the vote of confidence only enhances that. The second thing that I thought was really cool in the news on a cover standpoint that came out is Beasley Insurance. And I used to do a ton of business with them. They were one of the founding fathers. Now they've sold to Zurich, which was a little surprising. But they came out with what I thought was a really innovative kind of coverage concept. What I've noticed through the claims that I've handled is that when you have, especially for manufacturers or people who make widgets or anybody whose operational abilities are going to be challenged by a cyber attack, meaning systems are down, I can't make widgets, and therefore I can't make income. Business interruption claims, I've talked about this on this podcast before, are a huge pain in the ass. They're really difficult. They often require a lot of forensic accounting in order to justify your claim. And all that happens, the true business interruption, whether it's from a cyber attack or a fire, all that happens, all that work can take 6, 8 months before a single check is cut. That doesn't necessarily help businesses of any size when they have to plug a gap in their income right away. And so Beasley came out with what I thought was really innovative. I hope it's not just window dressing, but they're calling it cyber cash. Under $35 million accounts are going to get access to $25,000 within the first 5 days if they have a demonstrated loss of business. And then accounts over 35 up to $500 million are going to get access to up to $100,000. That $100,000 can be extremely meaningful, especially when you're paying out money that is maybe under your deductible, for example, or money that you're doing to kind of keep your business afloat. So I hope that's a trend that picks up. I hope that's maybe something that gets modified in the language of policies to provide some early checks a lot quicker, because I've been a part of business interruption claims on cyber where we haven't gotten paid in our loss for 6, 8 months until the claim is settled. The last news item that I want to talk about is this idea of artificial intelligence. And is this a silent cyber? And if you're looking at your policy at home buyer out there, you should not see the word artificial intelligence. You should use artificial intelligence to search your policy for any mention of artificial intelligence. The lack of any mention is what we call silent affirmation of coverage. You don't want anything. It should be an absolute fucking red flag if you see that word in there, because if you do, it is more than likely going to be limiting coverage. And what I'm hearing and not necessarily seeing quite yet is that some carriers are coming out to put some parameters around artificial intelligence. As a result, as one door closes, another door opens, and now we're seeing a marketplace emerge where a whole new type of coverage that could grow very rapidly comes out of the need for artificial intelligence. So the use case that I've been presented with and I've shown is that if I'm using artificial intelligence, I'm licensing some AI software that I'm building into my workflow that is then being used. I would use an insurance brokerage. I'm buying artificial intelligence, chat GPT tokens, and I am inserting that into my workflow. And that workflow is now going to be responsible for something that could cause economic damage to my client, whether it's advice that gets spit out, whether it's any kind of operation. And I don't necessarily have coverage because I didn't make the software myself. I'm just licensing it. but I also don't have enough coverage in the contract to the AI company, which almost is accepting no liability to cover potential economic damages. So there's this world of AI liability that is emerging. Westfield Insurance came out and said they were going to participate in this world. It's something to keep an eye on. But for right now, for brokers and for buyers out there, my biggest thing is you don't want the words artificial intelligence in your policy because it's never going to be affirmative. It's only going to be restricting coverage in some way. Shifting gears, litigation. I had a chance to talk to a couple of attorneys that I respect that I did a lot of business with over my career, and they all said the same thing. Look, ransomware frequency dipped for about 18 months. It's back up, but the bigger trend is that people just aren't paying ransoms. Because of the nature of ransom and because ransom always includes data exfiltration, most victims have said, to hell with this. I'm not going to pay because I still have to treat this information all as stolen. And it doesn't necessarily save me any money. All it is me buying the ability to control the narrative, at which point I don't necessarily care and I'm not going to pay the ransom. I already have a major mess on my hands. However, what has resulted from this is this huge growth, and I mean huge, in litigation. The two attorneys that I spoke with said that the litigation is almost a guarantee for any organization that has a record loss of over 5,000 in notified individuals. And obviously, it can be worse in some states, but the plaintiffs' attorneys have figured out that they can sit back and cherry pick whatever they want, and they can file these suits, and all of them settle. Both attorneys I talked to who are active in the insurance space have never seen any of these go to court. I searched LexisNexis to find out anything that went to a jury trial. I couldn't find a single one. And so, what that tells me is that they're continuing to access the settlement authority that comes under the insurance carriers who aren't willing to fight on these. The thing that I heard from one attorney that I would to note is if you are a company that deals at all with elderly or minor personal identifiable information, those are the cases that have had the worst time in terms of settlement. So knowing that you're already exposed, knowing that if you have a lot of data and it does become exposed, you're almost certainly facing litigation, but also just understand the type of data you have when you're analyzing your own risk. The next type of claim is related to pixel tracking. And to make this really short and sweet, the information that is collected about you when you visit a website or when you log into somewhere that stores your information, you oftentimes see privacy policies or these cookie banners or these things along those lines. Well, there is federal legislation, not just in California, which was called SIPA, but federal legislation now that is being targeted by plaintiff attorneys to file lawsuits called ECPA. And it's essentially old wiretapping language, but it carries a $10,000 a day per infraction type fine. And this legislation is being targeted as the basis for these lawsuits. And a lot of times, depending on the state that you're in, you need to organize your website specifically or your portal for your membership to access your website extremely carefully. Not only do you have to have a privacy banner that's going to be compliant with all 50 state laws or federal legislation, but you also have to make sure, for example, in the state of California, if somebody from California accesses your website, and if they see anything or if they are exposed, if your cookies are picking up my activity this moment I get to your website, you're in violation potentially of a California statute because I didn't see the cookie banner that says I accept. I got to the website and then I was able to click it. But I shouldn't have been able to get there if I did not click it. And so these subtle differences are driving a huge amount of litigation. Tracking technology and wiretapping type claims for 2015 through 2026 spring, there was 4,000 total in district, federal, and state court. Currently, we're on pace to have nearly 2,000 claims in 2026 alone. These are a honeypot for plaintiff attorneys, and they're easy to find. They don't need a billboard to induce plaintiffs. They just go look in the news. They go to the websites where you have to voluntarily report your data breaches. So, call to action. And this is for brokers and this is for buyers, certainly. Coverage items. So, I already mentioned this. There is going to be movements as we start to see artificial intelligence impact the loss landscape for cyber liability. There are going to be movements to restrict coverage. Here's how it happens. Cyber liability carriers will have an AI endorsement, and half the endorsement will be reading just to clarify it, and the other half you won't know, and the other half that is probably restricting coverage. When I say you don't want the words in your policy at all, you don't want the words in your policy at all. And in this unpredictable landscape, you certainly don't want that as long as you don't need to. And in a soft market, you have the power to not get this forced down your throat. It was very clear that during this Iran conflict, there was a lot of cyber attacks being levied. Now would be a good time, unfortunately, for all you brokers out there to revisit the war exclusion. I know the war exclusion was a pain in the ass. There's 42 different versions. People arguing over where the fuck a comma is, but it's a good time to look at your war exclusion. There's a lot of literature out there, and your broker should be able to tell you the good ones versus the bad ones, how it reflects to attribution, meaning where did the attack come from. But with the uptick in the amount of geopolitical events taking place, you do not want to be the example and the precedent that's made for an attack being traced back and a war exclusion being enacted. There are places, it is not that hard to make sure you have the broadest war exclusion and not the weakest one. It's another one of those areas where the carrier is not going to help you out by giving you the clues to the puzzle. The last piece I want to talk about, two last pieces, social engineering losses continue to run rampant. Those are where inducement is made or fake emails or spoofing takes place, inducing an organization to release money or release goods. These losses continue to be trying, and these are still trying losses when the policy is maybe only got a $250,000 or $500,000 sublimit. Carriers are rewriting these endorsements. They are changing the language to help curb losses. They're putting more conditions on how to generate coverage in the event of a loss. And so if you have any language in your policy, be sure to look at it closely. Be sure to see if you have callback provisions. It's been a widely known secret in the cyber world that some of this language that says $250,000 requires you to do so many things that the policy would never have to kick in because you would never have a loss. So it's a call to action. These losses continue to be on pace, and make sure that your coverage is what you think it is, or look to a crime policy to back it up. Last is wrongful collection. I was talking about the pixel tracking litigation. This has two parts. Not only is it a coverage area, if your policy, again, you have AI, use it. Is there anything in the policy about wrongful collection? Is there anything in the policy about ECPA or CIPA? Those are the California and the federal statutes. Search your policy. Anything that's revolving around words for wrongful collection are going to be restricting coverage. And this is going to get vetted out in underwriting these days. Are you collecting information? How are you managing it? But you don't want to put yourself behind the eight ball in terms of having coverage or not having coverage if you don't have to. And the second part of this is the call to action. Before I stepped away from the insurance business, we had a partner attorney. And if you want to know the name, happy to reach out to me and I'll give it to you. They were able to do kind of a health check on your website. They were able to go in using the same things that the plaintiff attorneys are using to scrape and see if you're not in compliance in all 50 states and do a health check on your website. Privacy panel, cookie banner, what are you collecting? How are you selling it back to, Meta or Facebook or whatever those things? This is a time when everybody's a victim, everybody's a potential target. So make sure that you are up to snuff in all the legislation that's going on so that you can reduce being a target for some of these plaintiffs' attorneys. Lots going on in cyber. The good news is, despite what all seems doom and gloom, the market remains soft. There's a ton of capacity. This is an opportunity to continue to claw back the premium that you gave away at the rise of ransomware and to reorganize your program to be more competitive than ever. Because if these things continue to burst and burst and burst, we are likely to see a little bit of a hardening of this market. So take advantage of it now by not only making sure that your coverage is exactly what you think it is, but also that you're paying a fair price for it.